Bill, thank you very much for sitting down with me and another of the 161 candidates. We'll talk about why you're sitting here by yourself as we get into it, but appreciate you being willing to sit down and want to share about yourself and let us get to know you and why you're running and why people should vote for you. So let's just start off. Tell us about yourself. Is this the first time you're running for elected office?
Yeah, absolutely. First time running for elected office. I grew up in Westmont in the west suburbs. I graduated from Downers North High School. If you went back and looked at my yearbook, it would not list a lot of activities underneath it because the thing that I did wasn't connected to school. It was scouting. So I grew up in the scouting program. I learned a lot there, and I ended up working at summer camps, and that's where I found my love for teaching and decided to be a teacher. So I went into education, graduated from Illinois State, one of the biggest teaching colleges in the state, and really have had a varied and very eventful career over the course of the last 20 years or so in education. So it's been quite a journey.
Talk about that. What's that journey been?
So my first teaching job was, I studied English in college, and I minored in history and Spanish. And so my first teaching job, I took over in the middle of the year for a Spanish teacher who decided he wanted to be a fireman. And I said in the interview, I'm not sure why you called me. It's my minor. I'm not fluent. I want to be clear about that. I could probably do Spanish 1, maybe Spanish 2. Anything beyond that is going to be tough. So of course they had me teach Spanish 3, which is supposed to be taught entirely in Spanish, and I had to improvise and figure that out. And they said, we appreciate the tough spot you were put in. We like the job you did. We want to bring you back to teach history. And so I got to teach history for 2 years at TF North High School. Unfortunately, the environment in that school wasn't great, and I could go into that a lot more, but I don't want to throw a school or the folks that worked there 20 years ago under the bus. The thing is, I just couldn't thrive in that environment, and I didn't like the way that students were seen as likely to be a problem. So after 2.5 years, I resigned, I packed it in, I thought I would never teach again, and I spent a year hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Wow.
And I was out in the woods, and I came into a town, and I saw the newspaper, and it said, "Economy has collapsed," because that was the fall of 2008. I thought I was going to come back and do anything else, but it turned out that was a terrible time to be looking for other jobs.
Yeah.
So when I came back, Kankakee High School had an open position, and I had still had an open application there because randomly I had applied to the Kankakee County Joint App. I ended up teaching in Kankakee for 6 years. I was the county teacher of the year there. I earned my national board certification, which about a little under 5% of teachers in the country can achieve, and was very successful. It was just a much better environment for me. And the key highlight at Kankakee High School was actually that I met my wife. They were asking for 2 volunteers to take tickets at the football game, and I said, that is a sucker's bet. The pay for that is so low and it takes so long. But the new gym teacher raised her hand, and I said, I'll spend 4 hours in a booth with her. And it was a
Paid
very
off.
long journey. Our journey could be its own podcast, but we did get married a few years later, and that prompted me to move down to Carbondale because she was accepted into the medical school there to study to be a PA. I'm very proud of what she's accomplished. She did a great job down there, and I moved down there to support her as we took that journey. Taught in Carbondale for 4 years, and that's when we moved back to Mokena in 2019 because we wanted to be closer to family. Her parents are right up the road, mine are a little bit further, and we wanted our kids to grow up around their grandparents.
It's great. So what have you thought of the area? How do you feel about the neighborhood? Community?
Initially we moved into the Arbory Hills neighborhood. We had great relationships with our neighbors. It's a very family-friendly community. Really loved living there. Not only is it family-friendly right there, but it's also very accessible. You're right by I-80. You can get anywhere you need to go, take the train. We really loved living there. We moved across town this past summer to Lincoln Estates. We wanted a little bit more land, a bigger home, and quite frankly, the school closings was the final straw. We had our third daughter in 2023, and we were kind of thinking, we've sort of outgrown this home, but at the time I worked from home, and I could open my window and literally hear the students playing at recess, and I thought, boy, it's going to be great when that's my daughter, right? So we were really on the fence about whether to stay or go, but when that school 2 blocks away was no longer there, it was the last straw and we looked for something else. But we're happy to stay in the district, and our daughters have had a great experience. My oldest is now at Indian Trail, really loves her teacher, really loves the experience, and it's a great place to be.
That's great. So how do you think, tell us maybe a little bit about your experience as an educator, because one of the things you like to hear as you talk about school boards is what the relationship between a school board and the educators as well as the administration should be. So from the perspective of an educator, how have you seen that role, and what has your experience been with, in those relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just to set a starting point, the school board has two major jobs. The first is to set policies for the district, and the second is to hire a superintendent and manage that superintendent to carry out the policies. And a lot of people think that, the school board can control everything, but it's really actually quite limited to those two things. And policies have a long-term timeline. If I set a policy tomorrow about a new, let's say, reading agenda or a new playground that we're going to build, you may not see the results for 2 or 3 years. And so it's really on the board to supervise that superintendent for the day-to-day things and make sure that they hire a great superintendent that's going to take care of them. As a teacher, one of the things that I bring to the table is the understanding of how those policies impact classrooms, teachers, and students. Because I've been both the beneficiary and the victim of policies, good or ill, for what they do in the classroom. And so when I think about what I would do as a board member, I'm always thinking about what it's going to look like in a classroom. Ultimately, a teacher is going to have to implement this. What's that going to look like for them? And how can we make the policy and set a timeline and work towards implementation that's going to be as smooth as possible? But I mentioned I moved up here in 2019. I no longer teach. It's a quirk of the school system that if you move districts too far into your career, they're not going to give you full salary credit and you take a huge pay cut. So teaching wasn't really an option for me. The best offer I got was 2 years of salary credit, which is a $15,000 pay cut. It just wasn't economically viable.
Yeah.
So now I work for a nonprofit. And ultimately, the focus of the nonprofit is teacher leadership. We empower teachers to lead change in schools. And so I've coached many teachers and their teams and their principals to carry out school improvement projects. And we empower teachers to go down to Springfield and say, hey, these policies that are impacting my classroom, they're not working for my students. And lawmakers, you'd think the worst thing is that lawmakers don't know what's happening in a classroom, but it's worse. They think they know because they were there 40 years ago. And so when they hear directly from teachers, that makes a difference. So now I've spent the last few years on the policy end as well, making policies and being able to work with teachers to shape policies that work for classrooms. So I bring that policy level experience as well. A couple of examples. Right now, I'm working on a bill to support teachers implementing AI in classrooms. Everybody knows it's going to transform education, but everybody's a little hesitant to engage because they don't know if they can do it safely. So I worked with teachers. We surveyed 200 teachers across the state. We worked with a few expert teachers and brought forward a policy that would have the state evaluate AI tools for safety and privacy concerns, make sure we know which ones are safe to use with students, support them with guidance and training so that teachers that want to go out and experiment with AI can do it safely. So that's the kind of thing that I work on, is bringing teacher voice to policy issues that impact kids.
So you'll create that policy, and then what do you do to advance that?
Well, then we work with teachers. Like I said, we also have the in-school arm. So we might have a group of teachers that say, hey, this policy that was just passed. We do this a lot with the literacy law that I helped pass a few years ago. It created a new state literacy plan for the state of Illinois, prompting reading instruction to really be based in what works for kids. There's a pretty clear body of science that you need to have multiple methods and approaches in reading that work together. And so I've worked with teachers to implement that in classrooms. How do you follow up the passing of policy by coaching folks through leading their peers to change instruction? So there's really those two angles. And when you're making a policy, it's really important to think about the implementation. And as folks are implementing, it's important for policymakers to make sure that they're clear and that they have all the resources that they need.
Looking at your experience and your background, how do you think that will play into your role as a potential school board member?
Well, I'll give an example from that AI policy. Just yesterday, I convened a group of stakeholders across the state. Unions, principals, advocacy groups, all of whom, and AI experts, all of whom had an interest in this bill being successful, and said, look, I wrote a draft, but I want to hear from everybody to make a policy that works for all. Well, that's the right approach to policymaking. It's not about who has the board majority, because whether this side or that side pushes their policy through, if we don't talk together and make it work for everybody, we all lose. And I think it's really important. Like for me, if there's a 4-3 majority on the board, that's not the end of discussion. It's the end of the discussion about whether to do something and the beginning of the discussion about how to do it in a way that works for everybody. When you put a big, impactful policy out there, you have to say, this is something that is going to impact everybody. It's going to change education in our schools. It's going to shift the daily experience for students and teachers. Let's get them at the table. Let's make sure that they have a chance to provide input. Talk about what it's going to look like in their classrooms, that parents have an opportunity to weigh in, that taxpayers have an opportunity to weigh in on issues that impact them, and put that policy out there for public comment, have forums, have town halls. There's got to be ways to reach out and bring people in. That's something that I've done across the state. It's something I've done in the schools that I've worked at, and it's something I would bring to the board.
So first, question I had thought after I got the email from you, because the other two interview groups have been very large. As we're back down to a little more intimate talking here. So
Absolutely.
I'd like to know why did you choose to run solo? Why not team up with somebody, or maybe what's going on there?
Absolutely. I will say this. If my only goal was to win, it's much easier to be part of a team. I have to walk 4 times as much, to knock on more doors, to do all of the things that a campaign entails. But it's worth it to me, because I would rather do it the right way and lose than do it the wrong way and win. For me, the right way is being an independent voice that can broker those kinds of deals that I was talking about when it comes to policy, that everybody gets some of what they need, so that the policy isn't just waiting until the next board comes in with a different majority to cancel it out and start anew. Long-lasting policymaking means bringing sides together so that everybody has skin in the game. I can do that better as an independent candidate than I could as a member of either slate. So it's really important to me to bring that independent voice. And I also think that it's about bringing people together and empowering folks, as opposed to like having those discussions within a small group and deciding that, we have the right answer, we're going to move forward. So just to give you one example, I worked at Kankakee High School, and in my second year there, the hallways were a mess. Like, kids went to 6 lunches, no classes, spent the rest of the day hanging out with the hall monitors whose job it was to get them to class.
Wow.
It was dysfunctional. And all of these folks were complaining, the administration needs to do something. They need to fix this problem. We had a new assistant superintendent who came in and said, hey, I want to come and listen to teachers. I'm going to be in the teacher's lounge all day this one day. I want to hear what we need at Kankakee High School. So I went to everybody I'd met over the last year and a half, and I said, hey, next Tuesday, 3 o'clock after school, come by my room. We're going to talk about this. This is an opportunity. And I hosted about 1/3 of the teaching staff there. We talked for half an hour about what we needed from administration, came up with a list of 8 things, and we went into that room one after another, and we told the assistant superintendent what we needed. It was really effective. It was $1.8 million in investment in security concerns like cameras and more hall monitors that was voted in a month and a half later. And so I was able to broker that kind of community effort as one person bringing people together. And I think one person has a lot of impact. But that wasn't even actually the part of that meeting I'm proudest of, because after that I said, look, now we got out what we needed from others. We can't ask other people to solve all our problems, though. There's 5 administrators and there's 105 teachers. What can we do? And we spent the rest of that meeting deciding that we would spend, each of us, an hour a week during one of our prep periods just wandering the halls. We developed a protocol, so we approached both the frequent flyers in the dean's office and the honors students the same way, respectfully. Within 2 weeks, those hallways were clear. And I think that, again, that illustrates the power of people coming together. It doesn't require us to have a formal organization. It doesn't require me to be a member of a team. It's about me sitting down and saying, what can we do together to move forward? So I don't think I need to be part of a slate to make a difference, but I do think I need to be independent in order to bring folks together to do work that focuses on our kids.
Very good. Obviously, the biggest issue in the district seems to have been the school closings.
Absolutely.
So maybe give me your perspective as a parent with kids that would be looking to go into those schools, and as an educator as well, how the district handled that. How did you feel communication was? What could have been improved? Just talk about the whole process there.
Yeah, I think if you go online and you just look at the comments, you'll see 2 basic ideas out there. One is, this was necessary, it had to happen, enrollment was dropping. The other is, no, that's not true. We didn't need to, and even if we did, we needed to do it a lot slower. And I think the answer is really nuanced. It's a national trend that enrollment is dropping. It's not unique to our district. It's no failing of ours. My generation, we're having less kids, and so we have less students in schools over time. And I think if you look at the enrollment numbers over time, it probably needed to happen. We might have been a little ahead of the curve, but it was a thing that needed to be discussed. I actually spoke up at one of the school board meetings. I was one of the 2 parents featured in the Southtown article, standing up and saying, hey, we need to take a look at this. We need to slow down, because you can't unsell schools once that decision is made. And that's where I would stand. Is it probably was a decision that needed to happen sooner or later, but I don't know that it needed to be sooner. We should have talked about such a large decision, had, as I was mentioning earlier, the kind of community input, so that when we do this in a way that people can all support. And that would involve talking to the community members, talking to parents, talking to teachers. I really am looking forward to hearing the teachers' questions on Wednesday at our candidate forum, because I think their voices haven't been heard. Teachers tend to be hesitant to go out and play politics in the community. They're focused on serving our kids, and rightly so. But I can't imagine my instruction was disrupted when I had to move classrooms down the hall. I can't imagine moving across town, taking everything with me, and working for a new principal or a new pair of principals. It had to introduce levels of chaos at the same time.
But it was
that we were
said it
introducing new
was
tech.
all done because there's rules, right?
There
and
are rules.
requirements. So I guess that's what would be interesting. I don't maybe understand is what's the difference between what had to be done, what was done, and what should have been done?
Sure. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know all the legal notice
Absolutely.
requirements. Right?
Either am I.
But I'll say this. There are legal notice requirements, and I believe they were all followed. And that this conversation had been going on for years longer than was legally required. But when the conversation happens at a school board meeting that's maybe attended by a half a dozen parents, that's not the same kind of proactive outreach communications that I would argue needed to happen. Because an issue that large involves everybody. Who's going to attend school board meetings? It's going to be very committed, very engaged, very involved parents who probably have students in schools. For me, a lot of this conversation happened before my daughter entered the district as a kindergartner. And so was I going to school board meetings? No. But I consider myself exceptionally informed when it comes to education and education policy, and I still had no idea that this conversation had been ongoing. Because why would I? So I think that's where you need to be proactive in communication. After the decision was made, I got a newsletter from the district that outlined all the reasons why the decision was made. I would have loved to receive that beforehand and have an extended time for public comment. Because if we had taken the time to listen to teachers, for instance, on what it should look like when they move to a new building, how can we work that all out, rather than trying to cobble that together over a 6-month period, I think it could have been done better. But again, it probably needed to be done in some way. It's about having enough community input that we could have all bought into the decision.
And talk about what you've seen now as the result of that. What do you think, how does that decision look in the short time frame we have looking back on it now?
Sure. I have a fairly limited perspective with one daughter in one school, and I can say that her experience has been fantastic. She has no idea this happened, and that's exactly how it should be. Our teachers have done a great job of adapting. It's what teachers do. We adapt, we solve problems, we serve kids. And so I want to really shout out our teachers for the efforts that they've made. But I've also been talking to teachers, and I'm not putting anybody on the record here. I don't want to put them in an awkward position, but I've heard some folks say, this year was a lot harder than any other year that they've had. And it's really been a struggle. And even in the lead up, teachers saying this is going to be a struggle. And I wonder if there's some things we could have done to mitigate that. Not being on the inside, I don't have those answers, but if I were, I would have talked to a lot more teachers and heard those concerns and made sure that they were addressed.
Anything else on the school closing issue that you would want to address or think is something you want to talk about?
I think one of the critical things to remember is that first of all, none of this is an issue that is a kid-facing issue. Yes, kids were impacted; they had to go to a new school, but it's not about instruction. It's not about their daily learning experience. These are adult conversations about how we use our tax dollars, how we shepherd resources, and they're really important conversations. But I want to put out there, we can't unsell the schools. So rehashing this conversation over and over is not really helpful. The question is, what do we do next? How do we move forward? If we can't unsell the schools, how do we take it from where we're at and move forward as productively as possible for students? I would like to hear more conversations about what are we going to do for students now that we've got some resources or saved some money on maintenance. What are those funds being used for? Like, we purchased a parcel of land right next to Rogus. I think it seems like we got a good deal. It's probably smart to have that contiguous property. Now the next question is, what are we going to do with it? Building a sidewalk so students can access the school makes some sense. Building pickleball courts, is that in the best interest of our students? Is that going to increase their learning? That's a question for the community. And yes, there's community value in having accessible public spaces, and that's good for families, which is good for kids. So that's an argument that can be had. But what I'm not hearing from any other candidate is actually a solid, concrete plan for what we're going to do to move our kids' achievement forward. And that's something that I would love to talk about.
The floor is yours.
All right. The first thing that I would do as a board member is seek to implement a district literacy plan. And when I've talked to a few people, they go, well, don't we have a curriculum? Didn't we just get a new curriculum? Yes, we did. But a curriculum is not a plan. A curriculum is a plan for teaching, But a plan for the district should include how we support that plan with training for teachers so that they feel equipped to deliver that curriculum, the resources that teachers need to implement it well, the time both to plan and adapt to a new curriculum, to implement it with students, make sure there's enough time carved out of the school day, not only for basic reading instruction, but for the kinds of interventions that some students might need, or higher level reading groups to push those that need an extra challenge, and the personnel to support all of this. That's a comprehensive plan moving forward about how we move our kids ahead in reading, such a fundamental skill that empowers them to do anything else. And then once that was done, I would move on to a numeracy plan so that we do the same thing for our math resources and curriculum and personnel and time that we do for for literacy. So I think it's so important that we really have a coordinated effort. And I don't think we have that right now. I think we look at the curriculum and go, yes, this is our reading instruction, but we need to do more to really make that implementable for teachers.
Can you talk a little bit about your experiences that you've had going to school board meetings, as well as maybe an interaction that you've had or work you've done with any board members?
With our current board?
Current, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Actually, the first thing that I did when I declared my candidacy, before I put any materials out about myself, is I just reached out to every other candidate in the race. And I said, let's connect as humans, because whether I'm on this side of the table or that side of the table as a community member, we're going to be working together for a while. We're all engaged. We all care. So let's get to know each other as humans so that we can build that foundational working relationship. So I've had conversations with most of them. We're all busy people. The schedule didn't always work out, but I had good email exchanges with one another. So I feel like everybody in the race, I'm not going to go out there and say that anybody in this race isn't very committed to our kids. That's true of everybody. We're committed. We might have different visions, different ideas, but I think we're all people that care. And I want to keep that at the forefront. Those relationships are important, even if you disagree, to be able to move forward. And when I say, we need to start to bring everybody in to get behind a solution, understanding everybody's why is really important to that. Because if I know that, just mentioning two current board members, if I know that Amy Burke wants this and Steph McClish wants that, and they're compatible, then maybe we can all win. And seeking those win-win solutions is important. So I've had great conversations with everyone on the board to get to know them as humans, and I think that's really important.
What do you think are the important issues, beyond what you've mentioned, but what are the important issues facing the school board going forward?
I think early on in the next term, the most important decision that the school board makes is hiring a superintendent. And we have a superintendent now who's signed a final contract with retirement at the end of it, so we have a clear end date. That conversation should start now. And it should start with building a profile of what we want our next superintendent to look like. Not with a search for individuals, but by defining the characteristics that an exceptional superintendent should have. I think first and foremost on that list is the ability to communicate and bring people together. We want somebody that is not just an accomplished leader, but an exceptional leader who can hear all sides and make everyone feel heard, even as we're moving forward in a direction that not everybody agrees with. That's going to be at the top of the list. Obviously, you want to see a track record of success and academic success with the ability to push students to excel at new levels. So building that profile is really important. And the way I would go about that is first talking with all the other board members to understand where we sit, but then gathering community input. I think that's something that we absolutely need everybody to have a voice in. So we should have community forums where people can say what they want in a superintendent. We should have opportunities for people that can't make it out, because honestly, that's a huge commitment, especially if you have young kids, to spend an evening coming out and talking about schools. We should have a form that people can submit online. We should have mailers going out. We should reach the community, because that's the most critical decision we'll make in the next few years.
Have you been, when you were in the schools, have you been a part of like a new superintendent coming in, a change in administration before?
I worked at Kankakee High School for 6 years. I had 7 principals.
Wow.
Administrative changes roil the district. And over that time, we had 2 superintendents as well.
What are the biggest challenges for teachers when those changes occur?
You really have to think about long-term implementation. The worst thing for an educator is when they can't predict what's coming next. Because teachers are very good at solving problems, but when the problem is new every day or month, it's really hard to adjust. So sometimes, even if the previous decision, if the current board made a decision that I came on and I disagreed with, the right decision might actually be to stick with that plan and just make it as good as it can be, because that will make sure that the implementation can follow through. And sometimes cutting that off and taking a sharp new direction might create more problems than it solves. So we have to be really thoughtful. That doesn't mean we don't need change, right? But we need to be thoughtful about implementation in a way that our teachers can adapt to. And I think that's true as we bring in a new superintendent, somebody that is adept in change management, which is its own science and process. How do you do change in a way that people can follow? So that's really a thought to bring to the table about how we approach whatever comes next for our district.
One of the really important issues to any parent and educators in the schools is safety. What do you think are things that could be improved? And I don't mean specific things that are being done in the school for safety-wise issue, but what kind of things can the schools do to make sure, or better ensure that us as parents, can feel safe sending our kids to schools?
I want to acknowledge a difficulty here, that the schools are doing more than the public can know. And it should be that way, because if we release all of our safety plans to the district, then it also potentially releases those to anybody that might want to create a problem. So I'm sure there are things I don't know about and can't speak
And I'm
to.
not necessarily speaking to hard security issues but there's definitely more that goes into the security issue. So that I guess maybe you can address that a little.
Yeah, I was just I'm a member of the Community Outreach Committee, which brings parents and taxpayers together to talk about issues the board is facing. We had a very robust discussion last week about school security, and I think some very good points were brought up. First, we're in several different police jurisdictions, which makes it very difficult to find a set of SROs, school resource officers, that could serve every school.
Sure.
Will County covers the entire district, so that if we wanted the same coverage for everybody, it would have to be Will County. But we're also Tinley, we're also Frankfort, so we need to make sure that we have the relationships with all of those agencies. But one of the parents, my counterpart at Indian Trail, actually brought up the idea that having a patrol car is a very visible presence that would deter a lot of folks that might want to cause a problem. Whether that car is parked at a different school every day, or if it's just in the neighborhood, or if it's there at pickup and drop off, it's just a visible sign that can be a very preventative measure. So in addition to everything that the school is doing behind the scenes that we don't hear about, having visible presence matters, however we arrange that. But I think I do want to mention there's a trade-off too in cost. So there was this debate about whether to go with a school resource officer who's trained to work with children. And I do think that's very important. I've worked with some great SROs that added huge value to our building beyond the safety and security by making students as people feel safe and welcome and able to come to an authority figure with problems. Folks that don't have that training, who are armed security guards, they may be off-duty police officers, they may be retired military, they may be folks with some training, but they don't have that specific student-facing training. So I do think there's a lot of value in an SRO, but you have to balance that with the cost, which is approximately double for having an officer who's trained, has that specialized training, versus somebody that doesn't.
Interesting. So are there, let's see. The other kind of issues that are brought up are the transportation, and again, you bring up the superintendent's contract extension, and a lot of the issues that seem to come up do circle around communication and transparency, or how different people will say it. But so speak to those, because how do you think the schools could better communicate, be more transparent? Like, what would you like to see different?
Sure. Well, I can tell you what I would commit to doing, because that's within my control, and then what the board could do as a group if they all agree. I work from home now, and I'm in the district. I'm right at Frankfort Square Road, Route 30. I can be in schools. I can be visible and talk to people. I can be available to community members almost any time of the day. And so that's one thing that I would do, is just be accessible. I'm here. My phone number, my email are on the website. Reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm also, over the next month, going to be doing a set of essentially listening tour stops, I guess, gatherings to just hear input from community members that I could take with me into the board if I'm honored to be chosen. And I think those are all important. As a board, I think we can do more to hold, we have board meetings, obviously, they're public, and you have public comment. Public comment is not discussion. There needs to be opportunities for back and forth as well. So whether that's as simple as having a town hall meeting where you can have informal discussions, whether that's having more mechanisms for community input, and specifically, I mean, most folks, they don't want to weigh in on the day-to-day of which company we go with for an HVAC contract, right? That's not the kind of things that people get upset about. What they do want is when there's a major decision that impacts the community, that there be a real intentional, proactive kind of outreach. And that's certainly something I would commit to.
What kind of things are you hearing when you're talking to people that come up as being important to them?
Well, I'll tell you the one thing that I hear every single person say that has had any recent contact with our schools is that our teachers are amazing. That's our greatest resource. Our kids come in well prepared. Our teachers do a great job of keeping them successful. And that's something that we have to protect at all costs. I think that's the most important thing. Honestly, knocking doors, I get a lot of different opinions about every other issue, right? Because folks are going to disagree. And I think that's healthy. And I think it's important that I hear all of those different opinions. Because again, if you want to craft the win-win that's a sustainable path forward, you got to hear all sides. So I think I've knocked on a lot of doors and talked about school closings, and folks go, I'm glad they did that. I didn't want to pay extra tax dollars for old buildings if we can pay for less. I mean, there's a lot of debate about how much money was saved, but 5 is less than 7. So if you're maintaining 5 buildings, it is going to cost less than 7 in the long term eventually. But plenty of other folks that say, yeah, I mean, I can't believe they did that because there's this wound from Lincoln Way North
Sure.
that served this community, right? And it feels like, well, here we go again. And again, that argues for the more proactive kind of outreach that needs to happen.
I know you sent me a lot of information you have, and you have a full website for your campaign, so I'll post that. But maybe just take some time and share with us why people should vote for you in the election coming up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I would start with experience. I've served in so many education roles from the classroom to the boardroom. I was an award-winning teacher. I earned that national board certification that can't be faked. You have to send in videos of yourself teaching and prove that you know what you're doing. And so I really know what it looks like to have success in the classroom. I've coached teachers from early childhood all the way through senior year of high school, serving all kinds of students in every kind of area to improve schools, to improve instruction. So I know what that looks like to manage that kind of change and to deliver results for students in other areas. I'm certified as a principal, and I've served on state level panels. I was appointed by the Illinois Education Association to serve on the state licensure board. I was appointed by Governor Rauner to serve on the board overseeing school funding in Illinois. So I've made policy, I've implemented policy, I've helped others implement policy, and I know what it looks like at every stage of the process. And I also know what it means to bring people together. As an example, in 2023, I worked with teachers to pass the Racism-Free Schools Act. And in today's environment, you would think anything related to race would be extremely controversial, right? We worked with everybody for so long to get so much input that passed unanimously in the Illinois State Senate. The most conservative and most liberal senators were on the same page because it was a bill that worked for everybody. For those who wanted to make sure that incidents were reported and addressed, it had clear definitions and training for teachers. But for those that were concerned that false accusations would be thrown out there, those very clear definitions also limited that. So there was something for everybody. And we're being able to do that work to bring folks together, even on an extremely controversial issue, is the kind of thing we need in this district to move ourselves forward and put that focus back on students. And the last thing I'd say is, again, going back, I think I'm the only candidate, as far as I'm aware, that has put together a specific plan for how we would improve student achievement by developing district literacy and numeracy plans. I hear a lot of talk about buildings. I don't hear enough talk about kids. And ultimately, that's where it's got to be our focus. Because whether you have kids in the district or not, our student achievement matters. It affects your home values. It affects the welcoming, safe, family-friendly communities that we want to live in. Whether you have children or your grandchildren come to visit you, you want that to be a place that families want to be. And that all starts with our schools. I've bought 2 homes in the past 6 years. You know what we look for first? What's the quality of the schools? And that's why we chose Summit Hill School District. We have great schools. We need to protect them and keep that focus on kids.
I saw that you had, I think you mentioned a little bit, but the events were you doing with the Teacher of the Year or something? Sure. Maybe just share what that was or what you're doing there.
Yeah, so in my work across state policy, I've interacted with the State Teacher of the Year organization a number of times. I've worked directly with, I want to say, 8 of the last 9 teachers of the year, and they're all great folks, and they see education in every part of the state, so they know what it looks like. They've seen. I heard somebody online say we're a failing district. I promise you, we're not a failing district. We're a great district. These folks have been all over to every corner of the state, and they've seen highly successful schools and some that are struggling. And so when it comes to knowing what a good school looks like, I was proud to have that endorsement of our current Teacher of the Year, and another award-winning teacher from Frankfurt who was 3-time Grammy nominated, won the Country Music Foundation Award. He's an exceptional band teacher at Eisenhower High School.
Oh, wow. And so did you guys have an event or something with them?
Yeah, we held a meet and greet over at Crepeology, which, shameless plug, best crepes I've ever had in my life. I was shocked. I go back whenever I can.
You're the second person to mention it on
they're
the
amazing.
podcast, so.
They're really good. I mean, they have the dinner ones, they have the sweet ones, they're all great. But yeah, they were just really welcoming and very friendly, and so it was a great space to host the event in, and being able to bring some folks out. I mean, everybody that entered a stranger left a campaign volunteer, so that's 100% success, right? When I get a chance to talk to people and lay out the vision, typically that they lean in and say, yeah, this is what we need for our kids.
Well, and it's great to have opportunities to get to know the candidates like that. People offering opportunities, which is always good. Because, like I said, it's extremely important. It's not only a huge part of our tax dollars, it's, our youth and our children and where they're going. So tell people how they can get to know you or get to talk to you between now and Election Day on April 1st.
Sure. The first thing, assuming this comes out before Wednesday evening there will be a candidate forum at the Mary Drew Gym scheduled for 7 o'clock. And that's hosted by our local teachers union, which I think is so important because, as I mentioned, teachers are often hesitant to air their problems in public because they're focused on kids, as they should be. But I want to hear what our teachers have to say. I want to hear their questions and hear what that experience has been like for them. So definitely come on out. I'm not sure whether that event will be recorded or live streamed. I'm not organizing it, but I sure hope so because I think people need to hear directly from all the candidates side by side. And I appreciate what you're doing, this apples to apples comparison. You're asking all of us questions. We get to answer the same way. The other thing is, if you're looking to find out about me specifically, the website is bill4summithill.com. That's bill, the number 4summithill.com. And on there you can find an email address, phone number, lots of ways to contact me, and the link to the Facebook page as well.
Well, great. Bill, I really appreciate you meeting up with me today, and best of luck. And be sure to check out all of the candidate interviews. All of the 161 candidate interviews are available, so a really good view of who your options are in this election.